Hello, everyone. Welcome to Just Chat with Uncle Dominic. We are here today on a special occasion. It's Tuesday. Yes, it's a double tent holiday in Taiwan, and a lot of things has is happening. Has happened this morning in Taiwan. Um, well, Today is pretty much the last day of the holiday, and we have an exciting topic today, which is understanding failures and obtaining success. How can we find out? And we actually have a special guest today. His name is Mike Palmieri. So I'll introduce you to him, and he can come and talk to you about more about him. Okay? So let's welcome Mike. Hello, Mike.
What's happening,
Hello,
Uncle
Kelvin
Dom?
Palmieri. Kelvin. I said Mike. Oh my God,
That's
Kelvin Palmieri. Okay,
it's all
welcome,
good.
Kevin Palmieri.
Uncle Dom, what's happening? It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm excited. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to our conversation today, my friend.
Excellent. Thank you for coming. Is that
Of
your
course.
your family at the back there, the pictures?
Yes, that is myself and my wonderful wife, and then we have two cats. I have a coaster somewhere with them, but I got to get a picture of them and I got to put them on there next. That's the next step.
Excellent. Well, can you introduce yourself to everyone here?
Yes. So I am Kevin Palmieri. I am the host, the founder, and the CFO of Next Level University. We are a global top 100 podcast with almost 1,500 episodes as of this week, listeners in 150 plus countries, and we do an episode every single day. So a new episode 7 days a week to add value to our amazing community. And beneath that, we've been able to create many different business opportunities to continue to add value to our amazing community.
How did you guys come up with the word next level? It's like it's a pretty cool name for it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So for the first 3 years or so, we were called the Hyper Conscious podcast. And hyper conscious just means acutely aware. So
Right.
I lived unconsciously. I wanted to live hyper consciously. And then one of our mentors, Evan Carmichael, said, "Hey, you guys are really good at what you do, but your name kind of sucks. I think you should change it." And Alan, my business partner, and I had a conversation, and we said, what do we say often? Who are we? And we always used to say next level. That was a next level workout. That pizza was next level. That movie was next level. So we
Mhm.
said, okay, that suggests progress. And yeah, we want to build an online university. So that made sense as well. And we went with that. And I think we rebranded when we were like 500 episodes in or something like that.
Wow. Is it tough to make a change?
I was very scared. I was terrified because when your audience knows you as one thing and then you completely rebrand, that can be a little scary. But in the short run, it was scary because our listens went down for a short time, but then our listens started to go up and up a lot more. So it was the right decision that we made for sure.
Right. So will this be like taking a risk to gaining success? Because people always say we need to take risks to be successful. And
Yeah.
would it be considered that?
Yeah, I think there's two frames, right? There's a lot of us, unfortunately, that are more afraid to lose than we are excited to win. So we
Mm.
could have stayed safe and said, well, you know what? We're just going to keep our name the same. It's done fine. It's done okay for where we need to go. And we wouldn't have taken that risk for a new level of success. So, yeah, I think a lot of us, unfortunately, when we do find quote unquote success, we work really hard not to lose it versus working really hard to gain a new level of success. So, I would say that's in alignment with that. Yeah.
So the thing with that is also right because we are afraid, like you mentioned that we are afraid to take the risk to take the change, right? So how does it how can we push ourselves to make that change to take the risk? I mean, you said your mentor come to, hey, I don't like your name sucks, can you please change it? And then give you a better name. I was like, oh, then you probably took the risk with your partner. But if in the case that for life changing choices that we have to make, should you, for example, go to this university or go to this university, or should I move the country or stuff like that? How does it
Yeah.
work? What do you think?
I think the simplest thing is you have to find a way to create some level of necessity. And if you think about it, if you think about whatever your favorite movie is, usually something happens to the main character that creates a level of necessity. So one of my favorite movies is Batman. So if we think of
Uh,
Batman and how Batman happened,
should
his
have worn my
family
Batman
got
jacket.
I would reference Spider-Man, I just don't know it well enough. But
All right.
Batman, his parents got murdered. That was the necessity for him to create a lot of changes and then become Batman and become the hero of his own story. I think that it really is like that for most of us, where you need to create some level of necessity. There's a reason people exercise way more before their class reunions, before their weddings. There's a reason when you go to the doctor and they say, hey, you really need to take your health more seriously, that usually facilitates some level of change. So the simplest answer, Uncle Dom, is that we need to create some level of necessity, because without necessity, you're just going to keep doing what you usually do. And if that's not getting you the result that you want, you're not going to end up changing. So necessity is big, and then some level of accountability too. One of the reasons goal setting is so important is because it keeps you accountable to making progress towards a determined goal. If you don't have goals, you're not going to have necessity to get any better. If we didn't want to continue podcasting, I wouldn't have to get any better. I wouldn't have to set up the studio differently. So yeah, I think it's a balance of necessity, having your back against the wall that forces you to change, and accountability, having somebody or something counting on you to continue progressing towards your goals.
That would be like a huge push, right? So
Yeah.
what if, for example, like for my students in school, like they haven't experienced any bad things happen to life, and decisions come. Like how can we motivate the students, younger students, right, or younger generations of us to take the risk and be successful in the future, because they don't see the bad things that has happened. They haven't
Mm.
seen the future. So how can we encourage them to make that choice?
Well, I think it's right in the title, understanding failures and obtaining success.
Mm.
Understanding that even if you haven't had, let's just say, adversity, if
Mhm.
you haven't had quote unquote adversity, you're going to. Life is going to happen to us regardless of how life has happened to us in the past. So I think letting people know that, look, you're in an age right now where you're not afraid of failure, really, because failure to you doesn't mean that much. But as you get older, your relationship with failure most likely is going to change, because you're going to become more afraid of judgment. You're going to become more afraid of people making fun of you. You're going to
Mm.
become more afraid of looking bad. If we can get younger, I'll just say younger kids, younger humans, to start practicing failure early and understanding that failure is not final, I think that helps to build the confidence. And I think it helps to build a cycle that can run more successfully. So if we think of it from, let's just imagine there's two cycles. If somebody doesn't have belief in themselves, they're most likely not going to take a new action. And if you don't take a new action, you're not going to get any results. And that proves to you that you're not quote unquote good enough, when that's not
Mm.
true. The second version is you don't have belief in yourself, but you have an amazing teacher who says, look, Kev, it might not go 100% right, but you got to try, because you're going to get a result that you would not have gotten if you didn't try. And it's not the end of the world if it doesn't go well. So I take Uncle Dom's advice, I take your support, I borrow your belief, and then I try. And I actually get some sort of result. And that proves to me that I'm more capable than I thought. And that becomes the cycle. So I would say in the beginning, I don't know if children are quote unquote confident. I think we aren't as focused on judgment and
Mm.
failure. Then when we get younger and older in life, I think that's when we have to rely on confidence, because then there is judgment. Then there is the fear of failure. So as early as we could bring that in and teach about what failure, quote unquote, actually is and how to get through it, I think that would be really good, because as a kid, you don't really have necessity to get better. But what you can do is get the awareness of how success and failure are connected.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's actually pretty terrible in the Asian community, because most Asians, right? They are tend to like, my parents want me to be successful. My parents want me to do this. My parents want me to do that. And when they don't succeed in it, or having the perfect score in the test, if they get 90, not 100, they tend to be like, oh no, my parents are gonna scold me or something. And
Mm.
so things like that. So if that do happen, for how can we help these Asian students, because it's a different
Well,
lifestyle.
yeah, I think one of the things is I don't necessarily understand the lifestyle as much, being as someone who grew up in the US and isn't necessarily
So-
as cultured as
right.
I as I could
Well, I'll
be.
give you another example. For example, if you see I'm gonna say this right. If you see a Western kid who falls down with the Western parental stuff, all right, the kid
Mm,
falls down, the parent will, oh, are you okay? Picks him up. But for Asian parents, usually if the kid falls down, I told you to walk nicely. You
mm.
shouldn't have run. They do this, so it's kind of very different, right? A
Yeah,
different kind of parenting.
it's a real, I think it's a real conversation around the understanding that there really isn't anybody who knows what's best for you.
Hmm.
Even if you think about it, your parents, they might claim to know what's best for you. They don't really know what's best for you unless they know exactly what you want, your core values, your core beliefs, your core aspirations. There's a lot that goes into that. One of the one of the things I would say is if you're living a life and you're designing a future for someone else, you are setting yourself up for regret. For
Hmm.
sure. Because this is a kind of a hardcore analogy, but I think it's one that lands. I was working with someone one time, and this person was very much fearing the judgment of their parents.
Hmm.
And they were at the place where they didn't live with them anymore, so it's not like they were putting a roof over their head. And I said, I really want you to think about something. I want you to imagine for the next 20 years, you live your life in the way that your parents want you to. And then one day they're going to die, most likely before you. And then you're going to say, okay, now what? Now I actually get to do what I love. Now I actually get to do what I wanted to do the whole time. Now I actually get to live a life that I want to live. Unfortunately, it might be too late for you at that point. Unfortunately, it might be too late in life where you might have circumstances going on and you might not have the opportunity to do some sort of change. We have to understand that your parents being mad at you isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, because if you're so far outside of alignment internally, you are going to suffer more from that, I believe. I really, really, really do. I've worked with a lot of people at this point, and one of the hardest things is overcoming the relationship you have with your family.
Hmm.
But I also think that's one of the most important things, because if you're living your life for your family, you're not most likely going to end up as fulfilled as you could be. And maybe one day you'll have a real talk with your family. But I really think, Uncle Dom, it's a very vulnerable place and you have to have vulnerable conversations. I just don't know how that's different maybe in the Eastern world and the Western world. The
Hmm.
topic of vulnerability is something I'd want to touch on for sure.
Hmm. Like in my profession, I'm a teacher. I teach in a high school, right? So
Mm,
occasionally in my program, some kids will do really bad on their tests, and sometimes they get 40 or 50. I keep telling them it's not the end of the world. I mean, you could improve on it. You can get better in it. You just have to try. And so they get depressed, or because they know that when they go home, their parents are gonna scold them or yell at them. So I often tell them to, either take this as a stepping stone. Like you get 50 this time, that means you're 50% better than before. I mean, if you try it next time and get harder in it, study harder, you might get 70, depending on the effort that you put in. And
mm.
so I do see some of the kids improve on this, but at the same time, it's very hard to get your words to, because as an adult, well, as a kid, you don't want to listen to an adult. I remember when I was young, if an adult tells me something, like, I don't know, you don't know what you're talking about, right? So yeah,
Yeah, I've been there. I've been there for sure.
I think everyone's been there. Everyone has
Right?
been there, right?
Yeah.
So, Kevin, you did mention that you hit rock bottom before. So,
Mm.
could you share us that story, and how that changed your life, and how, you know, I mean, it's kind of like a failure that you have experienced, and
Yeah.
so how can that, how are you now successful? So,
Yeah, I was someone who I don't think there was a lot of hope for my success. So I was raised by my mom and my grandmother. I didn't know my dad. I didn't meet my dad until I was 27. I didn't go to college because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and I just didn't think college was the right answer for me. So I ended up working a bunch of odd jobs. I was a forklift operator, a truck driver. I cleaned hospital floors and toilets, personal trainer, construction. I did many, many things. And in my early 20s, I got a job in an industry called weatherization. All that means is we would go into large buildings, usually schools, actually,
mhm.
and it was our job to make the buildings more energy efficient. So we would work on the doors, we'd work on the windows, we'd work in the attics, we'd work above the drop ceilings, we would do a lot of that type of stuff. And I went from making $15 an hour in the construction job I was working to making $60 an hour, $70 an hour, $90 an hour
Wow.
as a foreman of a weatherization company. So in my early 20s, I thought to myself, "Oh, I found my thing. This is going to be perfect. I'm set for life. This is going to be completely fine." But I never focused on working on myself internally. So what ended up happening was I went on to make the most money I'd ever made at 26. At 26, I made $100,000 with no college degree. And I got to the end of that year, and I remember thinking to myself, the money doesn't make me feel any better about myself. Yes, it's easier to pay the bills. Yes, I have a nice car. Yes, I have a nice apartment. Yes, that's good. I have a lot of abundance. But I don't feel abundant internally. I feel terrible. I am uncertain of the future. I'm insecure. I'm depressed. I'm anxious. I don't feel healthy internally, would be the best way to put it.
Were you feeling like that before you got there, or was it after you got there?
No, I felt that the whole time, but I assumed the more money I make, the more that internal stuff will go away. That was my thought. The reason I feel depressed and anxious and uncertain is because I don't have enough money yet. I don't have enough abundance yet. That ended up not being the answer. So when I cracked open my final pay stub of the year and I saw how much I made, and I remember thinking to myself, I have lived most of my life, especially this year, unconsciously. I'm just going through the motions. I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm doing this all for. The opposite of unconscious is hyperconscious. So that's when I started the podcast. When I started the podcast, I fell in love with podcasting because I felt like I was doing something that truly mattered. At the same time, Dominic, I fell out of love with my job because I knew I didn't want to do what it takes to get to the top like I did. Just for reference, I ended up spending 10 months on the road because many of our contracts were in other states. So I was living in hotels pretty much. So I start calling out of work. After I start the podcast, I start calling out of work. I start leaving the job site early. I'm showing up late. I'm not a great employee. But I just am so homesick, and it's so hard for me to go live in these hotels for weeks at end. And it was just really, really challenging. And this all came to a head for me when I was working 6 hours away from where I lived at the time. My alarm clock went off at 5:15 in the morning, sat up, I slid to the edge of the bed, I was lacing up my work boots. And the best way to explain it is that morning there was 10 televisions on in my head at the same time, and every single one was on a different station. And one is saying you're stuck here forever. I know you don't want to do this job. I know you don't want to travel, but people like you do not get opportunities like this. And people like you do not leave opportunities like this behind. And then I had the conversation with myself, well, if you did work up the courage to leave, what would your friends think? I have a reputation at this point. I get a lot of significance from success. What's your family going to think? All right, we talked about that. Was making more money than anybody in my family. And the big thing was, what are you going to do with your life? I genuinely felt lucky to get that job, and I couldn't imagine doing anything else. So it was in that moment, Dominic, where I thought to myself, if I just take my life, I'll take my problems with me and I won't have to worry about any of this. And that was the darkest place I'd ever been. That was my rock bottom basement. I don't know what to do from here. Now, luckily, I had a really good friend who's now my business partner, and I reached out to him and I explained what was going on. And in his wisdom, he said, Kev, over the last couple of years, your awareness, hyperconscious, has changed a ton, but your environments have remained the same. You're still living life the same way you always have. I think you should make a change. So I ended up leaving that job 3 or 4 months later. And then from then on, I've been a full-time podcaster, entrepreneur, business owner. And that was in 2018. But full disclosure, I was very broke and struggling very badly for like the first 3 years. So I didn't just leave that job and end up where we are. There has been a whole nother journey that happened after that.
Thank you for sharing that story.
Of course.
There's a lot to get from it. I'm really happy that when you're rock bottom, you actually went out and reached out to your friend. I think I know there's a lot of people who don't do that. When they hit rock bottom, they don't know what to do. They just stay there and and end up having suicide. So I'm glad that you found a friend and the friend actually picked you up. So
Mm.
viewers out there, I hope that when we feel rock bottom, we need to find a friend. Find a good friend at this. If you don't have a good friend, keep finding one, right? So
Well,
yeah.
that's the thing, Dominic. I think you have to do it. Here's the thing.
Hmm.
We have to build the umbrella long before the rain starts, because if you don't have an umbrella when it's
I
raining,
like
you're
that.
going to get wet.
I like that. Yeah.
And I think of that from the same standpoint of vulnerability, because a lot of people say that. They say, how were you able to be vulnerable with your friend at that time? That
Mm,
wasn't the first time I'd been vulnerable with him. I had been vulnerable with him
mm,
for a year before that, and we had some really deep conversations. So if you feel, this is always my thought, right now, if you feel 10 out of 10, you feel amazing, you feel like you can conquer the world, whatever it may be, now is the time to start practicing vulnerability with the people that you trust the most, because you never know when you might need it, and you never know when they may need it. It's going
mm.
to be very, very hard to be vulnerable when your back is against the wall and you are afraid of everything and you're afraid of that judgment. Build meaningful relationships when it's easy, so you have them to lean on when you need them and it's hard, is what I would say.
Yeah. Man, I don't know how to come up with that. You gotta talk to your friends, be vulnerable. That's the tricky part. Like when
Yeah.
we share our weakness to others, and we're afraid people will judge us. So that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
What happened recently for me as well? I want to share this too, because sometimes I feel I get down as well. Like, I'm not perfect. No one's. I don't think anyone's perfect. I mean,
Mm-mm.
I get down, and so I decided to take a short trip this week, and it took me quite a long distance on a motorcycle. So about 5 hours bike ride, to this destination. And so I
Mm.
went there and stayed a night there and came back. And so during this journey, people was asking me, he's like, why do you go there? Why are you gonna buy something there or whatever? I'm saying, no, it's all about feeling, how do I say, the journey to get there. Why I'm doing this, it makes me feel like I'm thinking, my brain is processing. So it
Mm.
helps me to understand what I'm lacking or what I can do to improve myself. And I like that. So I feel like sometimes, for anyone out there, if you're feeling down, if you don't have any friends to talk to, I mean, we should at least, take a journey, and figure out what's going on in our life, and reflect on it. And
Mm.
it's gonna be experiences to help us to get better. And actually, also this week, I had a friend who told me, it's like, Dominic, you're thinking about too much of the negativity in your life. And they said there is definitely a lot of positive things that has happened to me, maybe like 70% of the positivity, but I'm focusing on the 30% of the negativity things that happened. And
Mm.
therefore, when I think about it, I keep falling down. Actually, I am supposed to be going up, but I feel like I'm falling down. And so I feel like most people will feel that way too, because we are so focused on negativity of things that happen in our life, the bad part, and you drag ourselves down. Like, I think you mentioned that as well, right? So you need a change of an environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is emotional. Even the way you said it, you said, I feel like I'm focused on the 30% of quote unquote not good stuff, not the 70% of the good stuff. One of the things that's helped me tremendously, because I do something similar where I'll go and look at old content that we've posted, and it
Hmm.
just helps take me back to, oh, where was I 4 years ago? Like, what was going on in my life 4 years ago? And I think that perspective is so important. So this is what I always say. You and I are blessed because we have a podcast where we can look at our old content, but not everybody has that opportunity. Whether you're watching this or listening to this, take out your cell phone right now and do either an audio diary or a video diary of what you're dealing with. Today is whatever date, the 10th of
Hmm.
October, 2023. And currently, when it comes to my health, I feel like I'm making a lot of progress. When it comes to the money in my bank account, I don't know, I'm feeling really scarce and I don't know what to do. When it comes to my love life, I feel like I'm the loneliest I've ever been and I'm not sure what to do about that. And just talk to yourself for a few minutes. And then 2 months from today, look back. So do the same thing 2 months from today, record another video, and then look back and see what your old video said. That way, it's not just the emotion of saying, I feel like I'm not making progress.
Hmm.
You can actually have the logic of, oh my goodness, yeah, 6 months ago, I couldn't pay my bills and now I can. That's progress. The problem with it is there's always going to be resistance. You're always going to be dealing with the next thing that's going to help you get to the next level, but you might miss out on all the progress you've made to get to the level you're currently at. So that's been a very helpful thing that I've used with many clients, and I do that very often when I'm struggling or I feel like we're not making any progress.
Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Yeah. Um, we definitely need to record it. I think that's pretty much the main reason why I started my podcast, because I wanted something to for my children to look back one day if they need an advice. And like, because when my dad passed, I literally do not have anything of his besides his, his watch or his glasses, but there's no voice of his that I have a recording of him, just pictures. I mean, I lost all of that and I really wanted it. And so I figured that from that day on that I need to do something. And so I made this podcast, and I'm hoping, eventually my kids will learn from this in the future. If they need help, I'm on a video. I don't think YouTube will go down anytime soon, but so it's like a record of the things that has happened. So I really like the way you said it, that we all should
Thank you.
record it on our cell phone. Yeah, definitely. Um, so regarding about businesses and successes, right? So I've done a few businesses in my past, and none of them are very successful. And some people will say it's success in a certain level, but I feel like I could have done more. And so in that case, I'm trying to understand the failure that I have, but at the same time, I'm afraid of taking the risk to change it or to start the business again.
Hmm.
So in your case, you did your work thing and you change your work thing, and you have your business a hyper conscious, and then you change it to the next level. And then you mentioned that it took you 3 years, that it was pretty, you were broke and everything.
At
And
least,
so
yeah.
how was that struggle that makes you keep going, that 3 years? I think the viewers also want to know. I think the important part is your mindset during those 3 years that keep you going to right now, where you are right now,
Yeah.
successful now.
Yeah, it was the hardest. I mean, obviously a big part of my story is the having the suicidal ideations, and that the next 3 years honestly were harder than anything I'd ever experienced, because I went from making a lot of money to making no money. And I ended up $35,000 in credit card debt. There was a point where I couldn't pay my rent. Then when I reconnected with my wife. I actually knew her in my past, but when we started dating again and we moved in together, I couldn't afford to pay rent. I couldn't afford to buy her Christmas presents. It was one of the hardest things I've experienced, mostly financially. Now, the amount of uncertainty, the amount of insecurities I had to face, those were absolutely brutal. I didn't know anything about numbers. I didn't know anything about business. I didn't know anything about sales. I didn't know anything about organization. So I had to learn everything I know today on the fly. And I just had to figure out, okay, what can I do to make enough money to get to the end of the week? What can I do to make enough money to get to the end of the month? And it was like that for the first few years. So this journey has tested me in many, many, many ways. The thing that I always had, because that's the question I get asked often, what kept you going? How'd you keep going?
That's
Two
the thing. Yeah,
things.
we'll keep going.
Yeah, two things. One, I have a wonderful business partner. So I've never been alone on this journey, which I am eternally grateful for, because I don't know if I would have made it if I was alone. I probably wouldn't have. So that's part one. Part two, I always believed it would be worth it if I could make it. I didn't always believe it was possible for me. I didn't ever plan on getting to 1,500 episodes. That was never in my mind. But I did have a deep, deep, deep belief locked in that if I could make it, it would all be worth it. Always. I've always believed that. If I think something is worth it, I will do whatever it takes within reason to stay on that train for as long as humanly possible. And then here's the third thing. For me, it was never about having a successful business. It was never about money. It was never about being famous. It was never about any of that for me. For me, it was about having impact. So here's the thing. When I left my job and the podcast started to grow, I actually was getting more impact, more impact, more impact, more impact. So I was getting one of the results that I desired. Could I pay my bills at the time? No. But I was getting one of the results that I started this podcast for. That's why your why power behind why you start something is so important. If you started For you, Dominic, if you started this podcast to make as much money as humanly possible, as fast as humanly possible, you might not be doing it. But since you started it as a legacy thing for your children, I'm willing to bet you will do this longer than someone who just started for money. That why power underneath is so important. So anytime you have a moment where you say, I don't know if I can do this, I don't know if I'm going to make it, ask yourself, number one, do you think it will be worth it if you do? And then number two, why did you start this in the first place? And does that why power help you tap back into, okay, I got another one. I got another day. I got another week. I got another episode. I got another coaching call. Those are really the things that kept me going.
It's usually the problem for me is the self-talk. You know, I keep telling myself I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. You know, there's people telling me, why are you doing this, Dominic? And like, it's not worth it. No one's gonna watch your show. And I'm like, all this, you know, it just bugs me sometimes, and it makes me feel like, oh, if I can't do it, then maybe I'll postpone today's show to tomorrow, and then you know, so it's kind of a little bit difficult. That's what, yeah. I mean, it's the progress.
But it's set up. It's set up that way. That's the weird thing, Dominic, is this is what happens. People look at me and say, oh my goodness, imagine what it would be like if I could get to that point. But they don't think to themselves, I just have to do another 1,400 episodes. I'm convinced, I won't say anybody because I work really hard and I'm really consistent and I'm obsessed with getting better. But for the first 150 podcast episodes, I did not believe I was good at podcasting. I doubted myself before every single interview. I thought I was terrible. I had no confidence. If I stopped at 149 episodes, I wouldn't be here either. And I think that's the part is you will never get to the place where you believe in yourself if you don't continue pushing through the places you don't believe in yourself. It sounds so simple. And it makes sense logically, so much sense. But it is that thing of the people who are at the top of the industries are the people that kept going, even though they didn't think they were good enough, smart enough, fast enough, a good enough speaker, a good enough business owner, whatever it is. It's usually the people who just do it the longest that make it. So this would be my argument for you, Dominic. Nobody probably will listen in the first year. And a little bit more people will listen in the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth. And then when you get 6 years in, like we are, then that's when you'll start to see some real results. But unfortunately, a lot of people get to the end of year one and they say, oh, we only had 1,000 listens, right? We only had 1,056 or something like that in our first year. And we worked really, really, really hard. Now we get that in a day. So that never would have happened, though, if we stopped at the end of year one. I think that's the way it's set up. That's the way it's set up as humans, and that's how success is set up, unfortunately.
It's kind of like saying the grind to it, right? So
yeah.
Recently, I met another friend, and then she told me that she doesn't use social media. She doesn't use any of those things. Like, then what do you do for fun? I asked, and she said, I read books. I was like, why? Because every time I read books, couple pages a day, I learn something, and then eventually she becomes smarter. And she's actually pretty successful. I'm like, why didn't I think of that before? I love to read books, but I thought that reading books actually kind of like a time waster, because you know it doesn't help me so much. Maybe improve my language, improve some vocabularies and stuff like that, but doesn't really. I didn't think that it would actually help me in my life. So after listening to my friend said this, and I'm like, wow, and like she's successful. I'm sure this would work for me as well. And so I'm starting to read some books again. Pick it up. And so I told this to my students as well. If you're reading any Chinese books or English book, doesn't matter. Just take a book and read, even if it's just a novel. I mean, we're gonna gain something from it at least. I told them not to play too much games on their cell phones, because nowadays young people, they like to play the games on the cell phones. So yeah, I have a question here that I want to ask. Right?
Sure.
So like all those things that's happened to you is the stress, and so how do you manage your stress when it happens? So you get all the stress. How do you do it?
Yeah, two things. One, I am very regimented. So I'm in the gym pretty much every day. I slept in today. I needed to catch up on sleep, so I didn't go to the gym this morning. But the gym for me is a huge stress reliever. It grounds me in the beginning of the day. It forces me to do hard things. And then the rest of the day seems a little bit easier in comparison. So that's part one. Part two, I am very conscious of where my cup is. So all I mean by that is on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm thinking to myself, how full is my cup? How
Mm.
much am I capable of handling right now? I try to do a really good job of communicating with my wife. Hey, babe, just so you know, I'm pretty stressed out right now with all this stuff going on. So I apologize if I seem a little bit distant, or I might need a little bit of space, or can you give me a little bit of more support or
You
grace?
actually said that?
Yes, my wife and I have a lot of conversations like that, and same for her. When she's overwhelmed, when she's stressed out, it's very important because here's the thing. I am a little bit different when I'm stressed out. I try really hard not to be, but if I'm overwhelmed to the point where I am constantly thinking about how overwhelmed I am, it's harder to be present. It's harder to be patient. So I just ask for that grace of, hey, if I seem less patient, if I seem more frustrated, it's not a you thing, it's a me thing, and I'm dealing with a lot of
Mm.
stress. I This is where it's hard at times to talk through this because I am privileged enough to be able to create my own schedule. So if I'm stressed, if I'm overwhelmed, I can move a meeting and say, okay, what is the thing that would solve my stress? So what I do, Dominic, that has helped me a ton is I try to identify the stressor immediately. What is stressing me out actually? Is it the 7 meetings I have? No. Is it that one client that's disappointed in me?
Mm.
Yes. How do I solve that as quickly as humanly possible? I think identifying what's actually stressing you out is important because a lot of us say it's my workload, it's my commute, it's this, it's this, it's this. Awesome. Let's get very clear on what it actually is. What is it about the workload? Is it the fact that the work isn't as aligned as it used to be? Okay. Is the traffic terrible because you're not habit stacking and maybe you're not listening to an audiobook when you could, and at least you feel like you're making progress there? Okay, awesome. So I think the first thing is really to identify what actually is stressing you out about the situation. And then I would say the other side of that coin is for a long time, I didn't know what actually filled my cup. So I would think going out with friends to the bar fills my cup. It does not. That drains my cup. That is actually going to make me more stressed, not less. So I think we have to identify what are your cup fillers. For me, sitting alone and putting on mindless TV and just not watching it, just being there, that is super good for me. I need to get away from the world and I just need to sit with myself. The gym has always been therapy for me. Always, always, always. Writing music is huge. I love writing music. So oftentimes I think it's the things that seem like a giant waste of time that actually are very, very helpful for us to refill our cup. But it starts with identifying what those things are. So that would be
That's what
the
I
answer for
figured.
that.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for that. Thanks for that.
Of course, of course.
Because yeah, for like I tell my students sometimes, they get stressed out about certain things. I say if you're stressed about certain things, you just could get rid of it. And then they would say things like, "Oh, it's my mother. My mother stressed me out." It's like, "Oh, you can't get rid of your mother. So what can we do?" And so, and sometimes for me as well, like I tell myself when I drive to work, it's like people gonna drive the car recklessly, gonna cut in front of me, and sometimes it triggers me to like, oh, why are you driving like that,
Mm,
But sometimes it feels good to just turn on the music and just be quiet and let them do whatever they're doing, just enjoy the ride when I get to school. So I just need to tell myself that sometimes, everyone is stressful. There's gotta
yes.
be a way to, just well, here's what I'm saying. Everyone is stressful. People get stressful. We should not be concerned with other people's stress because we have our own stress. So we shouldn't be like, they're driving recklessly. We should be like, oh, interact with them. We shouldn't. We should just, be with ourselves. In that case, we don't stress out ourselves so much because we're already
Yeah.
stressful.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what I keep telling myself.
Mm,
And to avoid this kind of things that's happened, like enjoy my ride to work or my journey to work or whatever. So
yeah.
yeah.
You also, I think, designing your life to the maximum capability you can based on your schedule. A lot of us, unfortunately, when we wake up, the first thing we do is we grab our phone and we check social media. That's creating more stress than you realize. Or the last thing we do before we go to bed is we look at social media. That's creating more stress than you realize. There are probably some simple things that you can do that would eliminate some of your stress. I think
Mm.
a lot of our stress comes from reactivity. So think of it from two frames. One, Somebody sleeps till the last second possible, gets up, showers quick, makes their coffee really quickly, picks up the house really quickly, throws the dishes in the sink, and then leaves and is almost late every single day to work. And they spill their coffee and it's a whole thing. Or somebody who wakes up 30 minutes early, they get a good night's sleep, and they can kind of take their time getting ready for work. They can make their coffee, they can shower, they can feel on pace, like they're
Mm-hmm.
not rushing. I'm willing to bet that person is going to feel less stressed. They don't check social media when they wake up. They don't worry about that if they don't have to, if it's not part of their business. Setting up your day and starting and ending your day like that, I'm willing to bet will help you with some of the stress. And I think at the end of the day, stress is a byproduct of being human. It's just to what level and how aligned is the grind that you're partaking in.
Yeah, because I know that stress is gonna be there. There's gonna be always bad things. There's gonna be a wall there, no matter what we do. It just sometimes we just so focus on it that we
Yeah.
forget what we're actually the end game to it, like our
Yeah.
goal, right? So what would you say for students? What could be their end goal to be successful? Because right now some students, how would you say, they do not know what they want to do in the future. They just know they just need to get by every day. And so is there a way we can help them or to understand that there are more things for them in the future, like how they can be more successful if they change what they are right now?
Yeah, it's a this is always a challenging thought because if you ask somebody 20 years ago, they would have said if you're a kid and you're playing 7 hours of video games a day, you are in trouble. Now, there are many people who make millions and millions of dollars a year playing video games.
Mhm.
So, I would have two thoughts. I would say if you feel like you have an idea of what you want to do, and you feel like, you know what, I want to play video games, I want to do photography, I love this, I love this, I love this. I want to code, I want to be, I want to make apps, whatever. Web designer. I would say go get as good as humanly possible at that. Go specialize in that one thing and get really, really, really good at that because in the future, that may be a bigger opportunity than it is today. So that's somebody who has a little bit of certainty currently. If
Mm.
you don't have certainty, I would say go out and test a bunch of different stuff. I don't know if you can really be expected to know what you want to do with your future unless you practice a lot of stuff in the present because you don't have enough reference points.
Mm.
If the only thing I've ever had is pizza, and you say, what's your favorite food? I'm probably going to say pizza because I haven't had these other foods. But if I have had, my wife introduced me to Indian food. I had never had Indian food, and I was
Mhm.
convinced I'm not going to like this. I love it, Dominic. I love Indian food. So good. But that's because I was introduced to it and then I tried it. I think as a young person, you have the opportunity to try out a bunch of different stuff and see what feels good, see what feels bad, see what you lose track of time of when you're doing, yeah, what fills you up. Because now we're in a very powerful time where you can make a living doing just about anything because of the
That is
internet,
true. That is true.
right? That
Mm.
wasn't always that wasn't always possible. So if you're relatively sure of what you want to do, master that thing, spend a lot of time doing it, learn about it, make it a piece of what you do every day. If you're uncertain, I would say the opposite. Make exploration and learning about other things and experiencing new opportunities part of your everyday life. And then you'll have 100 things to choose from instead of two. And if you do have 100 things to choose from, I'd argue that you'll probably be more successful.
Mm. Like I have a kid the other day that came up to me and says, "What? I don't want to study well. I just want to, I don't want to go to college because I have my father's business to run when I finish high school." And I'm like, "Wow, okay. At least you have a backup plan. But what happens if your father's business fail? I mean, what's gonna happen after that?" So basically, I was telling him that I needed him to study hard so he can create some kind of a backup plan in case things doesn't go well. If his father's business doesn't go well, at least he can still go to college and maybe he can do pretty, get a degree there and then go to the university, whatever, and then get a degree and then eventually figure out what he can do besides just waiting on one
Mm,
opportunity. I'm sure that it's gonna be successful if he just wait for his father's business. But what if I told him, what if it doesn't happen?
yeah.
And so some kids in this days and age, they don't realize that bad things do happen And when I try to explain that, it makes me feel like I'm the bad guy, you know.
Mm.
So
Yeah, that's
I
hard. That's hard.
yeah, it's hard because I understand failures in my life, that things that has happened, and I kind of don't want it to happen again in someone else's life. But if I can share a little bit of insight towards it, I think that's what I would do.
Yeah.
Well, as a teacher, that's what I do, because I don't think previous my teachers when I was young ever mentioned anything to me at all. I don't have any recollection of my teachers. So I kind of be like, I want to be that kind of teacher that actually, explain to the students that there's gonna be some things out there that's gonna, be their downfall. And
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
there's a chance, I will be there to help them to lift them up if I can. So
Yeah.
that's why I'm trying to, yeah. Well, that's a lot of things we talk about today. It's a lot of things to think about. I was like, oh wow. I was like,
Mm.
yeah.
It goes by fast, Dominic. There's a lot.
There's a lot. There's so much we can still think about. Yeah. So well, we're running out of time in it also. So let's end it in a way, how, like, if there's a few words, a few phrases you could say to to end this in a great mindset. What would you
Mm.
say, Kevin?
Okay. I would have two. I would say, oh, I don't know. Yeah, there's probably a bunch. One of the things that's really helped me and I helped a lot of people I've worked with is this quote. One of the fundamental misbeliefs we have is that where somebody is today is where they've been forever, and where we are today is where we're going to be forever. And it's just not true. It's very hard to account for time. There's no reason that if you work as hard and diligently and as intelligently and as consistently as I have for the next 6 years, you can't end up where we are, because it's just time, right? You're looking at me 6 years ahead of where you are. So a lot can happen in 6 years. It doesn't mean you're going to be where you are forever. And it definitely doesn't mean I've been where I am forever, because as far as I'm concerned, I've only been this version of Kev that you see in front of you today. I was different yesterday than I am today. So that's one thought I would have. The other thought I would say is the biggest difference between who you are today and who you will be eventually is what you do. 5, 10, 15, 20 years from today, you are going to be different than you are today. Your life is going to look different than it does today. It will either be by accident or by design. So make sure the things that you're doing day in and day out, your future self are going to thank you for. I know it doesn't always connect, but your future is a result of the efforts, the person's, places, things, ideas, time, energy, focus that you're putting into today. That's what your future is going to look like. So just try to think more from that frame. Just because it's happening today does not mean it's not going to affect our 5 year from today self.
Thank you, Kevin. That's a
Of
great
course.
ending. So everyone remember, right? It's the things that we do today, the things that we do this very moment, it actually will affect us in a couple years' time in our future. We don't actually see it immediately, but it's gonna happen. Just look at Kevin. I bet he didn't realize what he's gonna be right now, maybe 20 years ago, but he is different now. So again, I want to thank you, Kevin Palmieri, for coming to Just Chat. Your story has shared a lot, so I hope it helped a lot of audiences today.
I
Thank you,
appreciate it.
everyone. I'm gonna say goodbye here, and it's goodbye.